Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall. We're in Luke chapter 23, starting in verse 44 this week. It says, darkness came over the land. But before you talk about that, I'd like you just to break the ice. Have a conversation. Are you more of a planner, or are you more of a take things as they come kind of person? If you're married, are both of you planners like Claudia and me? Or are one of you a planner and one of you are a take things as they come kind of person? Or are both of you take things as they come kind of people? Have opposites attracted in this area of your marriage? And then after you talk about that, I would like you to answer this question. If you're a planner, how often does your planning and your faith come in conflict? How often does your planning and God's sovereignty intersect? And if you're a take things as they come kind of person, be honest. Do you think that you're a little more of faith than those of us that are planners? Are you a little smug in that you are better in your relationship with God than we planners are? Well, after you get talking about that, I think there would be great value this week, don't often do this, but comparing all of the Gospels as they record Jesus' death on the cross. So I'd like you to turn to Matthew. In the book of Matthew, it's in chapter 27, starting in verse 45, and read on until you get to the end of Jesus' death on the cross. And then the same in the Gospel of Mark, starting in chapter 15 and verse 33, that you would read Mark's account. And then you would turn to John chapter 19, starting in verse 28, and reading on through there. And then after you've read all of those and Luke's account that we're reading today, answer these questions. What are the differences that the accounts have? What do you pick up in the story by reading Matthew, by reading Mark, by reading John? And then, are there any conflicts in the different stories that you notice? Second, it says, darkness came over the land. And I suggested to you on Sunday that I believe that this is total darkness, that it was pitch black in Jerusalem. And so I'd like you to turn to Exodus chapter 10, starting in verse 21 and reading 21 through 23. You can read a little more than that if you'd like. But this is the 9th plague. This is the plague of darkness. First, I think that we should turn there and see the account. Next, it says, darkness came over the land. And I suggested to you on Sunday that this is total darkness, much like the 9th plague that happened in Exodus chapter 10. I'd like you to turn to Exodus chapter 10 and read that passage, but specifically 21, 22, and 23. I think that there was total darkness that day, just like in Exodus, that this wasn't a natural event, but it was a supernatural event. What do you think? Talk about that. Then, in Luke's gospel, Jesus states his 7th saying and his last saying from the cross. He says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And then it says he breathed his last. What does it mean to you that Jesus is praying and calling God his Father to the very end? Is that beautiful for you, or is it something else? I told you this last weekend that none of the gospel writers say that Jesus died. So I think that you could look back at Matthew, look back at Mark, and look at John, those accounts that we read, and what language did they use? Luke, of course, says he breathed his last. What do the other gospel writers use to say that Jesus died? Because they don't say that he died. And then it only took Jesus 6 hours to breathe his last. Normally, someone that was crucified would hang on the cross for days. Why do you think that Jesus passed away so quickly? Finally, before you share your likes and your dislikes, I'd like you to talk about Jesus' tomb. Specifically, Luke says that one in which no one had been laid. Do you think that there is significance in the fact that Jesus is buried in a tomb that no one else has been in before? Does that remind you of anything else that's happened in Jesus' life, and even specifically in the last week of Jesus' life? And then, are there any practical reasons? There certainly could be spiritual reasons, but are there any practical reasons that Jesus would be buried in a tomb that no one else had ever been laid in? I think that'll be a fun discussion. Well, every week, I challenge you to pick what is your favorite thing in the passage. What I like this week, I like the responses at Jesus' death. I like the centurion, the leader of all that's happening there on that hill, say this man was innocent. I love that he comes to that conviction watching Jesus die. And I also like that the people that are there, that they are grieving over what they have done. It's a clear foreshadowing to Acts chapter 2, when on the day of Pentecost, 50 days later, Peter will preach that Jesus has risen from the dead, and thousands of these Jews will believe. We're getting a hint that that's coming in this passage. I really like that. What do I not like? I don't like that Joseph was omitted. Joseph of Arimathea was omitted from the meeting of the Sanhedrin, or that he was shouted down. We know that there was no vote upheld upon by the high priest, but he maybe was just shouted down as well as others. I don't like that. And then application. I just want you to think again, very specifically. This is a personal application. What is your plan for getting into heaven? In this passage, God has a plan, and that plan is Jesus. What is your plan for getting into heaven? Well, I hope that you enjoy group, and I will see you this next Sunday morning at Oma's Pumpkin Patch at 10:30 for Easter in the Park. Remember to bring the kiddos for an egg hunt. Remember, we're going to have lunch afterwards, and we're going to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. God bless. Bye-bye.